Hello, this is Ronnie McBrayer. Thank you for finding my podcast. If you are burned out on religion, to quote Eugene Peterson's marvelous paraphrase, but faith is still important to you, or if you consider yourself a spiritual exile with no real place of belief to call home, then I have you especially in mind. I hope you'll stick around. Thanks again for listening.
So, if you heard last week's talk from Ronnie, we were listened online. Today's a continuation. So it's the same reading from Acts 27, but in my accent, not Ronnie's. I was actually quite surprised by the detail.
Much improved.
Thank you. I was actually really surprised by the detail in this very hair-raising story about the precautions the tailors took in a bad storm and the preoccupation with safety. And I discovered that it was actually a very common theme in Greco-Roman travel accounts. So they were familiar themes and stories that people were obviously interested in reading about. So as you've heard it before, if you were here last week or listened, I'd like to invite you to use your imagination today. Maybe don't look at the words, much as if you're listening to an audiobook. You may want to close your eyes and put yourself in the scene. Imagine maybe you're one of the sailors in this boat in the storm, one of the crew. Acts 27. When the time came, we set sail for Italy. Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman officer named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Putting out to sea, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course. The wind was against us. We struggled along the coast. We lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall. And Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Men, he said, I believe there is trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and the owner than to Paul. When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought that they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength blew us out to sea. As gale-force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing cargo overboard. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until at last all hope was gone. About midnight on the 14th night of the storm, the sailors sensed that land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found the water was only 90 foot deep. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, "You will all die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach. They cut off the anchors, lowered the rudders, raised the foresail and headed toward the shore. But the ship was smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The commanding officer ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held onto planks or debris from the broken ship. Everyone escaped safely to the shore. Word of God for us today.
This week I learned that one of the most iconic sitcoms in U.S. televised history was the broadcasting victim of one of the most iconic dramas in U.S. television broadcasting history. I'm sure you will remember Gilligan's Island. Just sit right back and you'll hear the tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. And of course, the weather started getting rough and all that, so that the skipper and Gilligan, the professor, Ginger, and Marianne, and the Howells ended up marooned for years on a remote island in the South Pacific. 3 years, to be precise. That's how long the sitcom lasted. 3 years. Now, it's been in syndication now for over 60 years. 60 years. Generations have been witnesses to all this buffoonery. But the original was only 3 seasons, 98 episodes aired on CBS television from 1964 to 1967. It was scheduled to go on. Gilligan was doing well in the ratings and winning its time slot every Monday night, but CBS Network President William Paley was not a fan of the show. And his favorite television show was Gunsmoke. Yes, that Western drama set in Dodge City with Marshall Dillon, Miss Kitty, Festus, Doc Adams, also in syndication now for the last 60 plus years. Paley loved Gunsmoke, and Gunsmoke was in a ratings slump. So he proposed that Gunsmoke be moved to the prime position of Monday evening. This was years before Monday Night Football would become an American staple. And on Monday night, Gunsmoke returned as a ratings dominator. But what happened to Gilligan's Island? Canceled. No 4th season, no comfort for the cast and crew who had all moved to California to film the scheduled episodes. No notification to the public, zilch, zip, zippo, nothing. The crew and the passengers of the Minnow were left high and dry, marooned forever in sitcom purgatory. I didn't mean to gunsmoke you last week, but I did. From Acts 27, we read about this shipwreck worthy of television broadcast. It was Paul, Luke, his traveling companions, almost 300 others crossing the Mediterranean on a boat bound for Rome. Not a vacation, not a cruise. Paul was aboard a prison transport, a ship carrying those scheduled for trial before the Supreme Court of the Roman Empire. The ship encounters nothing short of a hurricane, a nor'easter. This storm clobbers the ship for days and nights on end. They are blown off course. They lose all their supplies. They lose their hope, and they begin grieving for their very lives. And just as I was getting near the end of the story, our broadcast ended, and I left you wondering as to the survival of our passenger and crew. I gunsmoked you, I suppose. But not to fear. I'm back with the conclusion of our tale today. Even the networks came back and rescued Gilligan eventually. Do you remember that? 10 years after abruptly leaving the survivors of the Minnow alone in the South Pacific, NBC produced a made-for-TV movie called Rescue from Gilligan's Island. I watched it as a child. It was terrible. Only a week, not 10 years. Last week I said this or something to this effect. Storms are coming for you. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not trying to make you feel bad or annoy you. I'm certainly not saying that to make you afraid. To live your life coiled up, to live your life afraid is no way to live at all. But simply, storms are bound to come into your life. Most of those storms will blow over in a day or two and will be no more worse for the wear. But some storms are devastating. Some storms are life-altering, faith-testing, soul-crushing disasters. They break us. They lash and they torment us in ways that the outside weather could never do. Where do you turn in the midst of one of these storms? How do you survive the storm? What do you do in a storm? That was the question that I asked last week. And I chose this text in Acts 27 and Paul's experience as a kind of blueprint for survival. The storm hit, day and night it rained, the winds blew, the seas roared, the ship's hull cracked and groaned, and ultimately it ran aground, splintering into a million pieces. Yet every person survives. How did they do that. What to do in a storm. As a recap, number one, I said you have to get rid of everything you don't need. The crew threw the cargo overboard. They even threw the ship's gear and rigging overboard. Under normal circumstances, this was unthinkable, but in a storm, it was absolutely necessary. And storms have a way of rearranging our priorities. When the pink slip arrives, when the health scare becomes a diagnosis or a prognosis, when the divorce is final, when the funeral is over, everything that seemed so uncompromisingly important sort of vanishes into the ether. Because when you are in a crisis, your effort, focus, attention, and spirit can only be given to a few vital things. You don't have the bandwidth. You don't have the capacity to operate otherwise. And I gave you all a homework assignment, and those papers are due today as you leave. Make a list of what is weighing your boat down, I said, in the storm. Name those things, and then have the courage to throw it overboard for the sake of survival. And number two, from the previous episode, you have to set your anchors deep. As Luke writes in Acts 27, the crew threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and they prayed for daylight. And sometimes that's all you can do. Anchor deep, pray for daylight. Yes, the storm's going to come. You're going to have to lighten your load, but don't cut every cord. There are some things so crucial, so essential, that if you cut those loose, you will be lost. We all need a few anchors to hold to. There's a proverb from the Stoics that goes like this: a ship should not rely upon one small anchor, neither should a life rest upon a single hope. We all need 3 or 4 things that keep us grounded, that keep us rooted. And so today we move on. Get rid of everything you don't need. Set your anchors deep. And a third thing this morning, when the storm comes, you got to stick together. This is Luke in Acts 27, 30 through 32. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, "You will all die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. We have 3 categories of people on this boat. There are the passengers, Luke, Paul, the other prisoners and other travelers. They are there by necessity. The second group are the soldiers. These are the guards charged with getting these prisoners to Rome. They are there by duty. It is their job. And then there is a third group, the sailors. Now, they don't really care about who or what is on the boat. People, livestock, wheat, ox carts. Their job is simply to navigate the vessel to the intended port. And now that they are so close to land, and now that all the goods have been thrown overboard, and now that they have no prospect whatsoever of getting paid for this hell on earth experience that they have had, they decide that it's over for them. They will cut their losses. We are out of here. And everybody else can fend for themselves. And it's hard to blame them. But Paul knows that they're still needed. Without their expertise, without their contribution, no one will survive. It's a storm. The goods have been lost. Shipwreck itself might be imminent, but the game hasn't been called just yet. There's a little ways still to go, and we have to stick together to get there. They are needed to get to where they are going. The soldiers must do their job. The sailors must do theirs. It's a living, breathing example of what Martin Luther King used to say: we may have all come here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. And they are all in the same boat. And it didn't really matter what one's job was or what one's status was or how much one was getting paid. Survival was the goal now, and that meant surviving together. When the winds blow and the waters rise, you have to stick together. You have to stick together with your people. And by your people, I'm not meaning that in a sectarian way. I'm talking about your people as those that you trust, those who have traveled with you, those who know what a storm is like, what it's like to be in the storm, your family. And sometimes you really can't stick with your family because sometimes in the storm, the family, your family, is the problem. Amen? But you have friends, true friends. Not those pictures of people on a list on Facebook. Not the people who you have their phone number in your phone. I'm talking about true friends, shipmates, fellow sojourners, those who know you, who understand you, who get you, and in spite of that, still love you anyway. You hear people say things like, in times of trouble, I just don't know how people without faith get through. And I understand that. But I have actually seen plenty of people get through the worst of troubles without faith. Maybe they do it by sheer stubbornness. But I have never seen anyone go through the worst storms completely alone. Those who survive the storms of life have at least a few people on their side. People that they trust. And they hold on to those people like life jackets in the storm. Those who withdraw, who cocoon, who isolate and cut themselves off from others in a time of crisis, they don't fare too well over time. Yes, in times of grief, we might need space. We might need time. We might need to be alone. But that's not a perpetual status that can be maintained. It will just make you insane. It will make you bitter. It will make you angry. It will make you brittle if you withdraw from deep friendships, from sticking together with others. You need the love and presence of other people. I mean, even if they are suffering the same way you are, isn't it at least good in a time of trouble to have someone with you in the storm at the same time and not be left alone? Pain will make us pull away. It will make us recoil. It will shut us down. It will calcify us. But fellow travelers pull us back in. They soften our sharp edges. They help us process our grief. They remind us that we are a part of the whole. No man is an island, John Donne wrote. Every person is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And we need the communion of others in times of trouble much more than in those times of joy and easiness. So what do we do in the storm? Get rid of what you don't need. Set your anchors deep. Stick together. And last, the hardest part of all, you just might, have to surrender to the storm. The end of this story goes like this. Luke writes, when morning dawned, they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. Here's why those sailors were still needed. So they cut off the anchors, lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed toward shore. But the ship was smashed by the force of the waves. It began to break apart. The commanding officer ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore. This is the most successful shipwreck you will ever read about. Not a single soul is lost. Thousands of dollars worth of cargo sunk to the bottom of the sea. A ship of incalculable worth to its owner pulverized into sawdust on the shore. The trip that could have taken a few days, a few weeks at most, will now take months to complete. But it's a success. How? Not a single person is harmed. They're waterlogged, they're seasick, and probably none of them are too eager to ever get back on a boat again. But all 276 souls saved, safe, and accounted for. In the end, though, the most terrifying ordeal comes, and that is the command to abandon ship. They have to give themselves over to the sea. The lightening of the load necessary in order to keep going. Anchoring deep, you have to, as there is no other way to know where the winds might blow you. Sticking together, yes, it takes everybody to get this far. But now there was no more fighting the sea. There was no more cursing the wind. No more wondering if the boat would hold together. No more striving against the impossible. Everything had been prelude to this great moment of faith. They leap into the water. If you could swim, over you go. If you can't swim, over you go. Everybody into the water, because now that is the only way that we're going to survive. You see, some storms are only survived by surrendering to them. You can't resist or persist. You can't overcome. You can't outlast or sail through. It's just all too much. You have to give up. Sink, swim, holding on to the debris of your life. You cast yourself onto the waters, floating obedient to the stream, to wherever the wind and the waves take you, trusting God with the result. It's probably easier to fight against the storm than it is to ultimately surrender to it and leave everything in God's hands. It's all the rage right now, as it should be, because the Odyssey is a marvelous film. Even though the story is known, even though we know the plot line long before we enter the theater, this story of the Odyssey has been known for more than 2,500 years. It's older than the time of King David. One of the oldest stories ever preserved. The formation tale, really, of Western civilization. The original, prototypical hero's journey. Odysseus makes for home after a 10-year military campaign, but it takes him another decade to find his way. 20 years lost. Harpies, sirens, giants, black magic, cyclops, defying the gods, fighting against the sea, the weather, and the fates. He lands on a small island after his entire crew has perished and his ship has been shattered to splinters. And the goddess Calypso takes him in, nurses him back to health, and then holds him hostage for 7 years. But finally, the spell is broken. Odysseus, as defiant as ever, sets out for home again in a ship he builds with his own hands. And Calypso warns him. She says, I wish you good fortune, but if you knew in your heart the full measure of suffering waiting for you, you would stay here with me in this house on this island and never leave. But the man is not yet broken. He says to Calypso words that you unfortunately will not hear in Christopher Nolan's 2026 version. He says, afar off my eyes behold my home. And woe be to me should I abandon my ship. As long as the timbers hold firm in their fastenings, so long will I remain. I will stay with it, I will endure. And if the waves take my oars, and should the heaving sea shake my raft to pieces, then I will swim. And that's one of those ancient quotes that finds its way into contemporary motivational speeches. It hangs nicely on a wall, or as someone's screensaver. It's full of courage and chutzpah. But I prefer what follows. In response, Calypso, played by Charlize Theron in this year's film, delivers the greatest line in the entire movie. She says to Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, what every one of us must hear at some point in our life, what every one of us will be forced to reckon with at some point in our own journey. She says this, Odysseus, you're a man who needs to control his fate, but you cannot control this. You must give yourself to the storm. Give yourself to God. Give up the fight. Give up control and live. It is this leap of faith you have not yet made. And it is there in surrender that Odysseus finally made it home, where he finally found peace. And I'll let Homer tell the tale one more time. Odysseus spread his sail to the breeze and guided his raft skillfully across the sea. For 17 days he sailed. But the clouds and troubled waters of the deep gathered. Roused were all manner of winds. The east wind, the south wind clashed. The stormy west and the north rolling together onward in a great wave. As a strong wind tosses a heap of straw that is dry, and some of it scatters here and some of it scatters there, even so the waves shattered the boat of Odysseus. And so he prayed, "Hear me, O king, whosoever you are. I come to you seeking to escape the sea. I am a wanderer driven to my knees. Have pity on me, your servant." So this God straightway stayed the stream and checked the waves and made calm before him and brought him safely to shore. Odysseus' knees collapsed. His strong hands fell, for his spirit had been crushed by the sea. With his body bloodied and the seawater flowing in streams from his mouth and nostrils, he lay breathless and speechless, with scarce strength to move, for terrible weariness had come upon him. But when he revived and his spirit returned again to his heart, he sank down in the reeds, kissed the earth, and gave thanks. What do you do in a storm? You get rid of what you don't need. You anchor deep. You stick together. And when the moment of truth finally arrives, you surrender to the sea, trusting God to bear you home.